welcome everyone to Avoiding Burnout. I'm actually going to wander around if that's all right. So you should be looking at the screen rather than me anyway. Recently, while I was talking with a client, I began to notice how he kept telling me about how his team was feeling what he termed as crazy busy, and about how colleagues had been taking a lot of unplanned days off recently, and even how some of his best people were leaving the organization entirely due to ill health. And this got me thinking about burnout. And after reflecting about my own experiences, which Sam mentioned, and doing some research into the topic, I came up with this presentation. Now, as Sam mentioned, the first part of me talking should last about 20 minutes or so. So that will leave us plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. So the headline level, I'm going to explore 4 questions. What is burnout? How does it manifest? And why is it important? And what can we do about it? So what is burnout? Well, I'm going to define it as the feeling of exhaustion that doesn't go away with a good night's sleep or a holiday. So burnout is quite a good metaphor, I think, because just like a real fire, it needs 2 things. It needs fuel, it needs oxygen. So let's start with the fuel, which is you, or more precisely, your energy. So each of us has a finite amount of energy available to us each day. I find it useful to imagine my energy as a drawer full of spoons. Now, ideally, I begin each day with the same number of spoons as the day before. And during the day, I spend my spoons on tasks and interactions that require energy. And my spoons are replaced when I rest and relax during my lunchtime and then after work. Now, burnout occurs when people consistently spend more spoons than they're able to replace. Over time, this leads to impaired decision-making, avoidable mistakes being made, ill health, both mental and physical, presenteeism, absenteeism, and eventually people quitting. And what's more, burnout is contagious because once it's inside an organization, it spreads like wildfire. If your energy is the fuel, the oxygen needed to keep the fire burning, the culture around you. So the more oxygen you feed a flame, the hotter it will burn, and the quicker the fuel will be consumed. And where I've seen and experienced high levels of burnout in an organization, the culture is one of managers and colleagues making too many badly prioritized demands on other people's time. So to better understand the scale of the problem, let's have a look at some of the studies emerging on working patterns over the last 15 months or so since the beginning of the pandemic. This headline comes from the Harvard Business Review. It tells us the average workday has increased by almost 40%. That's an extra 3-hour day. Now, much of that is down to people working the hours they would otherwise have spent commuting. It also suggests that people are regularly working lunchtimes and late into their evenings. The Gallup poll reported that 67% of people have become indifferent to their work. In other words, they're withholding energy from their job. What does this actually mean? Well, my guess is that it's down to our old friends, the burning spoons. I think these people, a full 2/3 of those surveyed, are acting out of self-preservation. And they can sense they're heading towards burnout and they're trying to hold some spoons back. And maybe they know that if they poured themselves completely into work, they wouldn't have enough energy to face, I don't know, the bedtime routine with their kids about losing their temper, or to tackle that pile of personal admin that's going on in the background and just stressing them out, or any other of 100 things that they need some spare energy to address.
David, could I pause for
Yes.
1 second? Would you mind just lifting your camera up slightly so we can see your face and not your chest?
Is that better?
That's perfect. Thank you.
So another study found that 45% of workers feel burned out. And these statistics tally what I'm hearing across different clients and different industries. In general, since the start of the pandemic and the enforced shift to remote only working, people are feeling that there's too much to do and their energy is being consumed by too many meetings involving too many people that last too long. So if you feel like your working life is a never-ending treadmill with more and more things added every day, then you may be on your way to burning out. So burnout can have many insidious effects. For example, when we're tired, we become more risk averse, and we're more likely to follow the same old path. Even with a bit of extra work, we could create a new and better way. In other words, when we're burned out and find ourselves in a hole, we tend to dig ourselves even deeper. So take a look at the image on the slide. It's taken from an experiment I read about in Nature, which asked participants in as few moves as possible to redesign the structure so that the blue platform on the top could support a heavy Lego house. So if you have any ideas about how you'd solve the puzzle, please post them to the chat. So as you do that, I'll tell you how I approached the task. So the first thing I noticed was that the blue platform was sort of overhanging the base on which it's been built. So I couldn't see a better way than adding another 3 bricks at the corners of the base to form a sort of square, thereby ensuring that when the house was added, it wouldn't tip one way or the other. The thing is, I was wrong. The best move is the simplest. You just take away the green brick under the blue platform and the house will be safe and secure. So don't worry if that wasn't your first thought. In the original experiment, only 2% of participants chose this solution. So what this and other experiments have proved is that humans have a tendency, when asked to improve something, to add to things rather than take things away. It's called additive reasoning. And what really grabbed my attention was the fact that the effect is multiplied when people are under what's termed cognitive load. That is, when they're under pressure and trying to do lots of things at the same time. So this explains why, for many of us, when faced with a long to-do list, we unwittingly start to work against ourselves. For example, doing work that frankly doesn't need doing right now, pursuing inefficient solutions full of unnecessary steps, or slipping into autopilot, then making mistakes that we have to go back and undo because of brain fog. In other words, when we're busy, we can't think straight. And in that state, we tend to complicate rather than simplify. A related idea is called completion bias, which means that when we get busy, we look for opportunities to complete easy tasks quickly. This explains why, when we're up to our eyeballs, we tick off the simplest items on our to-do list, regardless of whether or not they're worth doing. So I've experienced this as a kind of private negotiation. I'll say to myself, I'll just get these small bits done. So when it comes to the really important stuff, my head will be completely clear. Of course, all I'm really doing is procrastinating. I shouldn't feel bad. I'm hardly alone. In a classic study, the Harvard Business School professor Francesca Gino spent some time observing behaviors in the A&E department of a hospital. Now, as things became busier, the professor watched as the doctors and nurses started to favor the easier patients over the more acute problems. That is, when the staff started to feel overwhelmed, they searched for quick wins. So even amongst our best trained, most compassionate and expert healthcare professionals, they went to where the patients were healthiest. Now consider how these two phenomena work in tandem. On the one hand, we have additive reasoning, which means that when we're busy, we tend to complicate things. And on the other hand, we have completion bias, which means that when we feel overwhelmed, we tend to spend our time on the easiest, least important work first. Now, this surely explains why so many of us are feeling more and more busy all the time without necessarily feeling the intrinsic reward inherent in doing a hard day's work. In fact, we feel increasingly the opposite, because work without meaning or respite or value is exhausting and dispiriting. So no wonder so many of us are feeling burned out. So what can we do? The chap on screen is called Adam Grant. He's an organizational psychologist and a very clever fellow. And he's developed a good model for tackling burnout in individuals, teams, and organizations that I wanted to share. It's a simple 3-step model. It starts with demand, goes on to control, then on to support. So let's examine each of these in turn. The first step towards tackling burnout is to reduce the demands of the job. That's to say, burnout can often be solved by simply attempting fewer things. This is tackling the fuel part of the burning spoon problem head on. During my research, I've learned of organizations having success running workshops on how to separate out urgent tasks from important tasks. We've come to recognise that unimportant, unplanned work being thrust onto other people's plates is a symptom of bad prioritisation and leads directly to busy and unrewarding work lives. We've also recognised that for knowledge workers, the most wasteful thing we can do is to constantly switch contexts, leaving behind a pile of half-completed work. At one financial services company, the staff were given permission by leadership to ignore unscheduled, unimportant demands on their time. They called it the to-don't list, so that they could instead focus on what they considered to be the most beneficial thing they had to do that week, day, month, quarter. To help things along, the company explored the value of disabling all notifications on their colleagues' devices. Now, I think we've all heard this piece of advice before, and certainly I recognise the value of it, but I simply cannot resist the call of slack. And even when I'm deep in a piece of work and know that by clicking on that direct message, I'm going to ruin my flow and return to square one, I do it anyway. So on discovering that this is a kind of a universal truth, the financial services company disabled notifications at an admin level. This is radical stuff. In some parts of the business, it didn't make them. About half of the line managers kept making urgent, unplanned demands on their teams, and around a third of the staff instantly turned the notifications back on. But where the approach was implemented, it did make a difference. Productivity measurably improved, and recent staff surveys have confirmed that the motivation and morale in those teams has increased significantly. The next step will be to see if the approach can be accepted into the more resistant parts of the business. A couple more things. The ultimate definition of what the words urgent and important mean should be left up to the individual to decide. The point here is that colleagues should be empowered to say, I'm going to prioritize this over that, and be trusted that they're making the right call, which brings us to the second part of Grant's model, which is control. People need to be given more control over how they do their job. So consider flexible working. The other side of this pandemic, we're all going to have to confront how we feel about returning to the office and our working patterns therein. Now, most of us, not all, but most, agree we don't want it to return to exactly how it was, and neither do we want to work remotely full-time forever. At the moment, many organizations are performing research to better understand how their employees want to work in terms of a hybrid working model. This is important because it will directly impact things like location strategy. So do you really need to pay for that massive office if people only plan to come into the office 2 days a week? It'll also impact talent attraction and retention strategies. So would you leave your job if another company promised to give you the flexibility you wanted that wasn't being offered by your current employer? The smartest organizations are applying themselves to the task of finding the best possible answers to these questions, because they know that getting it right will give them a huge advantage in the markets in which they operate. And getting it wrong could be ruinous to their ability to survive and thrive in the new normal. Many are planning on offering flexible options across a broad spectrum of preferences and monitoring how things work during the first weeks and months after we were allowed to return to the office. By reserving the right to rethink their decisions as the facts change, those organizations stand the best chance of succeeding. In fact, I'm pretty sure that giving colleagues more control over how and where they work beyond this pandemic will be a major source of competitive advantage, resulting in the most flexible companies jumping way ahead of their competitors. Lastly, support. Leaders, managers, and peers should be doing what they can to change the culture to help their colleagues better cope with the demands of their working lives. This is the oxygen part of the burning spoon equation. Recently, I attended a webinar during which a major telecommunications brand talked about the success they've enjoyed by walking the talk when it comes to tackling burnout. They've started to encourage colleagues to include their preferred working patterns in their email footer. So for example, my core working hours are 9 to 5:30, Monday to Friday. If you send an email during the evening, please don't expect to reply until the next day. If you send an email over the weekend, please don't expect to reply until the next week. Other colleagues have made it a rule that they'll neither arrange nor attend meetings that happen at lunchtime. At one company I was talking to recently, they're actively exploring how to make it impossible to book a meeting into people's calendars at lunch. When I presented this idea to a client recently, I had leaders telling me that whilst they routinely sent emails during evenings and weekends, they'd never ever expect their teams to do the same. And as gently as I could, I reminded them that all they were doing was causing confusion by essentially saying, do as I say, but not as I do. I think it's crucial for all of us, at all levels, at any organization, to recognize our personal contribution to the culture around us. If you don't want people to send emails out of hours, start by not sending them yourself. If you work non-typical hours because you have other demands on your time, such as, I don't know, the school run or caring for a relative, of course that's fine. But you can still schedule the message to be sent the next morning when everyone else is back at their desk. You lose nothing by behaving this way, but we all stand to gain a great deal. Now, twice now, I've mentioned interventions at the organizational level. So disabling notifications at one company, making it impossible to book lunchtime meetings into people's diaries at another. This explicitly acknowledges that these systems aren't self-regulating. Individuals taking a stand on their own against, I don't know, lunchtime meetings or evening and weekend emails won't make a dent. Organizational problems require organizational solutions. Feeling further along this thread, you ban all lunchtime meetings. You insist on meeting-free Fridays like Channel 4 are doing. The question is, where do all these displaced meetings go? They need to happen somehow, sometime, don't they? Well, they may do, although I'm really not convinced that all meetings need to happen or last as long as they do. Because another alarming stat I found while researching this issue showed that since the start of the pandemic, there's been a 29% increase in the time spent in team meetings, a 24% increase in individual meetings. A lot has been written about Zoom fatigue, which sounds to me like a specific symptom of burnout. The fact remains that if half or more of your working day is absorbed by meetings, when are you supposed to get your actual work done? And it's not only the volume of meetings, but the nature of them. Meetings, during my working life at least, have somehow become the default option when sharing information or discussing ideas. Meetings are being used to bring together time-poor individuals, who are, by the way, time-poor because of all the meetings they have to attend, who are then asked to try and work through a range of topics, typically in quite a free-form way, within an allotted time. And if you're an introvert surrounded by a bunch of extroverts, you might sit there for upwards of 90 minutes and never get a word in edgeways, all the time picturing the work that's piling up back at your desk. And if there's unresolved conflict in the group, those meetings can be very tense affairs, full of silence that's often mistaken for agreement. In my experience, the typical meeting is too long, involves too many people, and tries to cover too much ground. So what can we do about it? Well, a while ago on Twitter, I saw a version of this taxonomy that's on screen now. I liked it because the author was arguing that a meeting should have a purpose. Not particularly mind-blowing, perhaps. Bear with me. Imagine a meeting whip limit of 1. Imagine only being brought together to do one of these things, let's say refine the ideas. That's all you're there to do. Perhaps there's an agenda. How I miss agendas. And when you're done, you're done. The worst meetings I've attended are the ones that wander all over this taxonomy, doing a bit of this over here, and a bit of that over there. Imagine a future in which meetings are only called for a specific, single, appropriate purpose. Not only would all meetings be cut in half, many meetings wouldn't need to happen at all. So I just added hearts to those categories of discussion that may not need an accompanying meeting at all. Instead, I'm starting to hear of companies adopting an asynchronous first approach to these topics, which, as you can see, are basically informational. That is, instead of calling a meeting, colleagues are encouraged to publish information to a shared space for anyone to read and comment on in their own time. Questions and requests are asked of the appropriate person or people by email or in a tool like Teams or Slack, with a sensible amount of time allowed for an answer, let's say 3 days. This may sound counterintuitive, but it's quicker to wait for the answers than for everyone to quickly hop on a Zoom. But the overhead of coordinating multiple diaries to respond to a specific point is significant, and a pointless 2-hour meeting involving 8 colleagues costs the company 16 hours, not 1 hour. There are much, much better ways to be spending our time. Now, before I wrap up, I want us to do one thing together now. If not for me, then for this poor cat. If you use a Google Calendar, open it up and click on Settings. It's the cog icon in the top right-hand corner. Once in Settings, scroll down to Event Settings and check the box entitled Speedy Meetings. What this does is make a half an hour meeting 25 minutes long and every hour-long meeting 50 minutes long. That means that even if you do find yourself back to back, you'll have time between meetings to stretch your legs, fetch a drink of water, or just get away from the screen for a bit. I heard this tip from someone who works at a company who's really putting some effort into trying to tackle burnout and Zoom fatigue, and they described the effect as magic. However, it did take about a year to normalize because people didn't respect the speedy meeting. The secret to this simple, easy, and effective technique is to abide by the rules, all of us. When the 25 minutes are up, the meeting is over. And if we can manage that, and there's no reason to think we can't, we'll instantly see and experience good results. So give it a go. Okay. Let's bring this to a close by talking through a couple of conclusions. To reduce burnout, organizations need to take action to tackle the culture of excessive demand. Long and unprioritized to-do lists burn people out. So we all need to be trusted and empowered to say no to things. Individuals need to have more control over how they spend their energy at work. All other things being equal, we should privilege the important over the urgent. We should all reconsider once again the power of turning off notifications, and into and beyond the new normal, colleagues should be allowed to work when and where and how they prefer. The only way to sustainably improve things is for everyone, especially those in leadership positions, to model and abide by certain desired behaviors. I recommend adding your preferred working hours to your email footer, never booking meetings at antisocial times, and asking yourself each time you book a meeting with other people, does this need all of us to be on a Zoom call at the same time, or could we work asynchronously on this? And lastly, we should always aim, above all else, to reserve the right to change our minds. This last year and more has been hard on everyone. And it may sound exhausting to try and alter your approach, to try something new, but a little bit of progress towards where we want to be is infinitely more valuable than standing still in misery. In my experience, across all the different organizations I work with since the pandemic, the individuals, teams, and organizations that are best able to make informed bets, fail, and rethink their decisions, especially during these uncertain times, the more productive, the most likely to succeed, and most importantly, they're happier. And that's that. Happy to answer any questions.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, David. Really enjoyed that. You could stop sharing your screen actually, and we can see faces. That's lovely. Thank you. I've just been while you were talking, I was sort of panicking about the number of work bombs I might have sent people and induced burnouts without realizing it. But fortunately, we have some questions. So I am going to start with the top one. I actually would like to invite Alan just to join us in a sort of fishbowl way, just to talk about the question that he's asked, which is how does it work when you're in a temporarily distributed team? I think it was related to something you said, a specific thing that you said, and I wanted just to add him to that context.
So the question is,
so Alan asks, how does it work when you're in a temporarily distributed team? And if Alan, you could just raise your hand, we'll add you to the chat. We'll add you to the panel for a bit, and you can hang on 1 second. Here we are. Here's Alan.
Hello, Alan.
Hello.
It's a great question. I think it,
it might be lacking the context because I typed it while you were talking, obviously.
Yeah, that's why I thought I'd invite you.
Yes. No, so the question was in relation to comments your suggestions that you made, David, about enforcing the lunch hour and working hours, like enforcing no meetings outside of core working hours and lunch hour. And I was reflecting that most of the work I've done in the last number of years has had temporally distributed teams where, you know, with more than a few hours time zone difference. And that means if you add in, by the time you add in lunch as a no meetings time, you're down to really just 1 or 2 hours.
Yeah, that's a great point. I suppose you want to tackle the root causes, which where I got to at the end, which is, do we always need a meeting to have that conversation? Which means that you halve, let's say, potentially half the number of meetings you need to have. And then, do we need this amount of time for each meeting, especially if they're scheduled regularly, just in case, as opposed to instituting that WIP limit of just keeping the conversations quite specific and maximizing the time you spend together, if we regard our times together in meetings as quite precious. But I do take your point, it's hard. I mean, I managed a team over in New York and Florida for a while, so 5 hours time difference. And so abiding by this was a challenge, but it wasn't impossible. It wasn't impossible.
Great, thank you,
Thanks.
David. If you want to stay, Alan, you're welcome to. But I'm not going to kick you out yet until I have something to add. Just quickly, there was a few people who unfortunately arrived late because there's something wrong with the link. It's just to reassure you that this is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it in its full glorious 45 minutes. Probably tomorrow when it gets posted up onto our website. So also, if anybody wants to join the fishbowl and wants to come and ask a question or talk about something, just raise your hand in the menu and we will add you. So the next question that I'd like to present is actually, there are two. One is from Matthew van Rensburg, which is there a way to determine if the burnout you're potentially aging towards is self-induced or team-based or cultural?
Great question. I think probably there's always going to be both. So that's why the burning spoon things works, because it needs your fuel, as in your energy. It needs that oxygen, which is the culture around you. So you might be able to solve this for yourself by saying, I'm not going to go to lunchtime meetings anymore. But if the culture persists around you to make unreasonable demands on your time, you're hiding to nowhere. I think that ultimately this isn't your fault, but burnout happens to all of us, to the best of us. And that if you're heading towards burnout, then you need to know how and when and where to ask for help, because there is some stuff being written about how we need to just become more aware of our stress and then think about ways to build our resilience, and then from there create coping strategies. I just completely disagree. Mindfulness isn't going to save us from burnout, and the longer we delay acknowledging that we're in that situation, the worse it's going to be and the longer it's going to take to recover.
Thanks, David. Matthew, if you want to join us just to talk about what your experience of that is, just raise your hand and we'll add you to the panel. Otherwise, I'd like to I'm going to go to the next question, which is from Thomas Grenier. The first one I want to ask from Thomas is, well, I'm going to let him ask it, in fact. Thomas.
Hi, I don't know how to put my camera on, but yeah, my question was, everything about burnout is like obvious once you start talking about it, but as you say, it can happen to everyone. So I'm assuming that you don't know enough that it's happening to you until it becomes really hard. Is there ways to help people read the signs before they get slowly and more into their hole, so that they can act, or at least they can be self-aware?
Yeah, it's a great question, and of course it edges way beyond my expertise as a product strategist towards basically psychology, because it does manifest differently in different people. So you read of first-hand accounts of people losing their appetite or gaining weight or losing sleep. But there are classics such as it's 3 o'clock on a Sunday and you dread work. But typically what happens is that people find ways to dampen or minimize the effects of stress through coping mechanisms, which we've all learned, which means that you head towards a crisis point at which the symptoms thereafter hockey stick up. It is that you should be aware of the fact that you might be feeling stressed because these things have become, that hitherto have been easy to do, now become really hard. And then you should go seek advice and help.
But is there an organizational, you say mostly when you care about stuff, it has to be an organizational answer. You think there's an organizational answer to this?
Probably, well, definitely. And so I touched on some of them. You do need to address how people are behaving so that they're not creating, even unwittingly, extra burdens on their colleagues. So for example, sending an email on a weekend and someone seeing that could potentially really stress someone out, let alone late in the evening, let alone we must just get it done culture. You know, we're heading towards the end of a sprint. We're going to pull a 12-hour session. We're going to eat pizza. Even as mundane as it is, it's still important. People need lunch times. They need time to get away from their screens and their work for a certain amount of time in the middle of the day. Otherwise, they are going to burn out. So there are things that you can do in terms of creating cultural norms in an organization to sort of tackle some of that stuff.
There's a thing, isn't there, about sort of avoiding kind of the hero culture of always being on the edge of fixing a crisis. That's the same. It looks the same as burnout.
Thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas.
Thomas.
I'm going to answer another question, which is from Azarul. Sorry. If I've gotten to the stage where I am burnt out, what is the best way to recover from that?
Great question, and I'm sorry to hear it. I mean, again, I'm not a psychologist or a mental health professional. I would say that acknowledging the problem is a great first step. The stories I read and my own experience was that I recognized things too late and had to take a significant amount of time taking a step back from the environment I found myself in. So if we can recognize and address these things sooner, it needn't be particularly catastrophic. It's about talking to the professionals within your company and or the mechanisms that they've supplied in terms of support in this regard, and taking their advice and being honest about it.
Great answer. Thank you, David. I'm going to ask Todd to join us. Todd, would you raise your hand, and then we can invite you to the panelist and we can talk about your question. There we go. Great.
Yeah. So I guess over the past year, I realized that I really had to take it upon myself to draw my own red lines and take care of myself, because it really no organization is really going to do that for you, no matter what rules and whatnot you try to set up. So, you know, people have line manage. I've advised to do the same. And even though I truly believe people are caring for each other and they don't want to see each other burn out, you know, I kind of realize it's just really up to the individual to draw those lines and stick to them and have a sort of quote, quote, permission to do that and the confidence to do that. And, you know, I guess, you know, that's something that I found. I'm curious what other people think of that approach, or if that's too cynical or whatnot. Please debate.
So that's interesting. So do you think that the culture of the team also has an impact on whether you're able to do that as an individual?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, and I think the smaller and tightly knit the team is, the easier it is to create those red lines. But I think like at a larger organizational level, I think it's really difficult to sort of mandate that nobody's going to have meetings over lunch. And then you sort of say, oh, well, people are working offshore, so you can only have meetings in the first half of the day. And then it's just too many circumstances to create blanket rules like that. And I found that for myself, I block out lunch. I do a pretty healthy lunch so I can have time to work. And I stick to that. I say no. I just say I'm not going to do that meeting. We'll have to move it. And I feel a lot better for it. I get a walk in every day, and I'm just curious if other people are doing a similar sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess the overall question is pastoral care. How much is the individual responsible for that, and how much, like, how can you support somebody to at least have the confidence to let the individual make those decisions and let them know that you have their back if they're going to decide to draw those red lines for themselves?
I think that's a great question. And before you answer it, David, I'm just going to invite Thomas back, but I'd also like to invite. There's a question from Devangi Kamra that I'd like to invite her to join us too, if she's able to. But Devangi's asked about in a burnout organisation, I can see a team heading in the same direction, and I think it's sort of related to the question you're debating, Todd, about how do you get permission from your team? How do you, as an individual, control your pastoral care?
I mean, ultimately, the best place to start is to have an open and honest conversation. All other things being equal, right? You need the psychological safety. If you can talk to the people around you in your team and beyond about what you want and need from them in order to not find yourself anywhere near burnout, then that's the place to start. And if we can agree as a team or in a wider cultural organization on establishing and defending those desired behaviors and giving you both the permission and the control over how and where you work, then that will go a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy Todd brought that up, because I was getting a little nervous that we were giving a lot of tips that looked like we were just telling people and trying to treat them as kids. I think David nailed it. I think I agree with Todd. It is ultimately your responsibility. Nobody can take it away from you. It is your responsibility, your mental health. Now, the company, the best thing the organization can do for you is create that sexual safety, as David said, because we're all different and we all need something slightly different at one given moment in time. You are the person that knows what works for you. What the organization needs to do is to let you be able to say to others what you need in such a way that you don't have to worry about blowback or people thinking you are lazy or whatever. So I think that as long as you establish that sexual safety, I think that's where the organization, for me anyway, my kind of organization would stop and then let people speak and say what they want and make sure no one is getting judged for needing something. That's the way I would look at it.
Thanks, Thomas. Devangi, does that help with does that sort of make sense for your situation as well in terms of influencing the culture to the mental health of your teams?
It does, in a way. So where I'm coming from is that I might directly be able to influence the psychological safety and the mental health of my team by making sure that I am not giving them things which are not prioritized, things which are not required at this point of time. However, if the leadership is something that, for lack of any other word, is just providing lip service as to how important psychological safety is, or how important mental health is, but in reality, it's visible that stress on work being completed in time, and stress of the success that the company needs to reach at a certain time. How do you help in such a situation when you are in the middle? You have the leadership which is giving you priorities, but you know that your team can't handle those kind of priorities right now. So as a middle person, is there any way that I can influence this or become more like a net for my team?
I'm going to let you have 30 seconds to answer that, David.
Look, that's a really, really tough position to find oneself in. You are between a rock and a hard place. It's sometimes easier to speak on someone else's behalf than your own. So by representing your team's feelings and situation to the more senior stakeholders in the organization in quite a strong way is easier than saying, I'm really struggling myself, even if you are. But
yeah.
I'll just go back to my earlier answer, which is that you do need to be honest and you do need to call it out. It does require some bravery and courageousness. But because also they may be blissfully unaware of just how difficult it is for those teams because they're too far away from it. And we've got to hope that there are some human beings in there who'll go, oh, wow, we didn't know it was as bad as that. There are things we can do.
Lovely. Thank you.
That's it.
David.
That helps.
Thank you, Devangi.
Thank you.
I'm just conscious that we are not going to abuse everybody's time, so we are going to finish on time. So in the last minute, I just wanted to raise one thing that Liz Leakey actually raised, which is that meetings are often where the work happens. And although we perhaps need more words to describe different types of meetings, like the Inuit people who have lots of words for snow, the word meeting has become a bit of a groan word, but meetings can be great too, to get work done. So it's worth, sometimes we all do need to talk to each other. So on that note, I would like to thank everybody for being here today. Really appreciate you taking the time out to talk about a very important subject. And I'd like to say a special thank you to David for putting the time in to really use his experience, very personal experience, to talk about something that's really important to all of us and to be very useful. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, everybody. There will be a recording of this available in a day or two, and keep an eye on our website. We've got lots more events coming up, lots more brown bags for you to join and talk. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening or afternoon, wherever you are.